Hello and welcome to Creative Warrior, where we fight for our creativity. This is a Creative Warrior chat. And today's creativity guest is Andrew Van Wey. Andrew is an award-winning author of 6 books, including Head Like a Hole and his newest release, By the Light of Dead Stars. His debut novel, Forsaken, has been downloaded 95,000 times, probably more by now, and counting, and undergone film development at multiple production companies with first look deals. His short fiction has been featured in eFiction magazine and Lamplight, and we're going to let Andrew tell you a little bit more about his current projects and releases. So hello, Andrew. Thank you so much for joining.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yes, tell us a little bit about what you have. We're gonna jump into your origin story and go backwards here in a minute, but tell us what's going on right now, what you have, your newest release, what you have in progress, anything that new readers should know about you and your work.
So right now, I'm really excited about a new series that I've got. It's Cosmic Horror Meets Coming of Age. The first book in that series is titled By the Light of Dead Stars. The series title is called Beyond the Lost Coast. It's set in a sort of fictionalized version of a Northern California region called the Lost Coast that's fascinated me for 30 odd years of my life. And it's about a 43-year-old man and a 14-year-old girl who come together and end up living in this town after a tragedy brings them together. And the series is good for people who like Stranger Things, Kids on Bicycles, Haunted Towns, any of those kind of tropes with a big, heavy helping of cosmic horror and Lovecraftian monsters. I'm really excited about it. And the second book should be coming out later this year. The edits are going off to my editor and then my proofreaders and my beta readers in about 6 weeks. And then from there, out into the world.
That's awesome. I can't wait. I am currently reading By the Light of Dead Stars, and it is one of those books that you just want to get back to
Oh,
as
thank you.
quickly as you can. I read Head Like a Hole, so really looking forward to the whole series and learning more about the whole vibe of the coastal towns and the secrets and the monsters that lurk there is really fascinating to me. And we'll talk more about that and where your ideas kind of come from. But first, tell us a little bit about your origin story, how you started writing, maybe even a bit about what led you down your current publishing path, how you maybe got into self-publishing. Just tell us all about your writing journey.
Wow, you'd probably need about 3 hours. So I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest condensed version. I was a film student and a screenwriter in my 20s. I went to film school in Los Angeles, and then I worked in story development and screenwriting for several years, lived in Los Angeles, and spent pretty much most of my 20s pitching to producers, being on the other sides of pitches, helping screenwriters adapt pre-existing properties, writing stuff of my own on spec. I had agents, I had a manager. And so I spent that whole time up until about the writer's strike of 2007 doing that. And then after that, I essentially hit burnout mode. I was unemployed for about 18 months because there was the writer's strike, all the money dried up. And I met a woman who is also a horror reader, a fan of horror. And over the next few years, she really encouraged me to try novelizing some of my works. So I have this whole back catalog of probably 20 original ideas that every now and then we'll kind of go to the shelf and pluck something off and kind of look at it and dust it off and see if this idea still holds up after 2 decades. I ended up marrying that woman, thankfully, because she's probably given me the wisest advice and the most wind in my sails that anyone could ever give me. But she was the one who went back through some of my ideas and pulled out one of them, which was called Forsaken, which got me a bunch of meetings. It landed me some agents. It was one of those scripts that I wrote that opened a lot of doors, but just was tonally really difficult. It had, I don't know if you've read it or not, but it has some really dark undertones to it. And it was one of those things where it led towards an ending that I always feel is kind of the saddest possible happy ending of a story. Stuff that like Guillermo del Toro writes, those kind of things. So she really pushed me to novelize that because I've been writing books. I've got 5 trunk books in my 20s that I produced, just like every other writer, just to practice and get the form right. And I spent about a year doing that. And when I was done, I gave it to her. Just tell me what you think. Do you think that that we've got something here? And she reads, for every book I read, she reads 5. And we fell in love through horror books as well. So she said, yeah, I think you've got something here. Here's what we should change. Here's what we shouldn't do, but let's give it to some other people, get it out there. And she was my advocate to really kind of hit the publish button on the early days of indie publishing, when the Kindle was brand new, when voices like Hugh Howey were out there, when a lot of horror was kind of making the jump over to Kindle and ebooks and stuff like that. So that's my super villain origin story.
I love it. Love it. And what an adorable meet cute too. I feel like that probably has to be in a story or a book somewhere.
Oh yeah. Yeah. 2 weirdos meeting at a bookstore and talking about our favorite Bret Easton Ellis book and which one is the most shocking. Yeah. It's wonderful. It's been perfect through line for our entire marriage as well.
Awesome. So it sounds like you've always kind of had that creative bug. Has it always been kind of stirring there under the surface? Is that kind of why you got into screenwriting and all of that to begin with?
Yeah, absolutely. Storytelling has always fascinated me. It's how I make sense of the world. It's how I synthesize what's going on around me. It's how I experience storylines from different times. It's how I build up resilience to hard situations. It's one of those things that when I look back, I can see this clear through line through my entire life. Oh, when I was, in 3rd grade, I was in the hospital for several months at a time because I was undergoing treatment for this. And I got through it with Stephen King novels. I got through it with scary books, R.L. Stine, things like that, that made the terror of being in a hospital room much easier to confront instead of some, horrible clown from outer space that can take the form of your darkest fears.
A little more terrifying than the hospital, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. But when you're 10 or 11, that nurse at the hospital can still be pretty freaky.
Yeah. Or those clowns they bring in to try
to try to soothe you. Yeah, nothing works with clowns.
No. Okay. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so I think sometimes, like, no matter how confident a writer is in their abilities, there's always kind of a certain kind of writing that they're certain they would never be able to pull off. And for me, like, this is by no means a critique of my own writing. I'm confident in the writing that I do, but for me, that type of writing is what you do. Like, I read, the scenes the monsters, the scenarios that you create, and I'm just like, how does it like, where does that even come from? So where do you get kind of some of your inspiration for these monsters, these descriptions, this vivid imagery that you create for these scenes? And where does it come, like scene by scene, or like does this monster just come up and you're like, I gotta write a whole book around this monster? Kind of walk us through a little bit of your inspirational process there.
So I think for every book, it's different. For the Cosmic Horror series, it absolutely starts with the history of the town and this entity that they've sort of made deals with each other throughout history. So by the light of dead stars, there's much more history tied into that monster. And throughout the series, we're going to learn more about its presence through the ages. With Head Like a Hole, I essentially knew the shape of the story. I wanted something to be an amalgamation of the 90s. So I wanted it to have elements of Scream. I wanted it to have elements of I Know What You Did Last Summer. I wanted it to have elements of some of those straight to video 90s movies where the characters were, trying to fight this monster that was coming after them one by one. And of course, that amalgamation kind of manifested itself in the character of Oksana, who takes on the personification of these different people who she believes wronged her. So it's different with each project. With Forsaken, it's essentially the question, what is this painting that keeps changing? Why is it changing every time I view it? Is the painting really changing? Is it affecting me? am I changing? It was a little bit more psychological than some of the other horror. So that the monster changes with each book, and sometimes the monster are the characters themselves. And those are sometimes usually the funnest to write because they take me in entirely different directions than I would if I had just thrown down, something with a chainsaw and sent them off to, go slaughter a group of teenagers or something.
Yeah, and you do a really great job of the development of not only the monsters and the, making you feel sorry kind of for the circumstances that led to, maybe, I don't want to go into too much for those who haven't read anything, but that part you do really well, but also the characters, the other characters, the good guys, if you will, going through all of this, the character development is like, I was reading, By the Light of the Dead Stars, and realized that like nothing kind of horror like had happened in a few chapters, and I was totally okay with that. I was just reading about this relationship between, the uncle and his niece, and I was just watching them live their life. And I think that combination of horror is hard to do. It's either the horror that you're like, I'm here for this, or the, characters and you're here for that, but you do a great job of both. Is there any inspiration or any tips you have for kind of building that relationship between the two?
Yeah, so something I hear my books called a lot is a slow burn, and that
Mm.
phrase has never really made sense to me because I need to spend a lot of time in a world with the characters before I care about something awful happening to those characters. And every book is going to be different. Stephen King knows this, and that's why, some of his books are these 800-page door stoppers. With By the Light of Dead Stars, knowing that this book was going to be part of a series, I have to sort of drop in that character development at the beginning so that we care about these characters. And these characters, more than almost any other characters that I've written about, they really emerged organically in my head as I was ruminating about this series. Like I saw a girl skateboard by, and that gave me the inspiration for Zelda. Suddenly it was just like I had this shape of this 13-year-old girl with this baggy hoodie on. And then the 43-year-old, I mean, so much of that is plucked from my own experience or people that I know. These characters really kind of sprung up on me. Whereas I think in other books, like Head Like a Hole, for example, we had to hit the ground running really quickly. This is a one and done book. So we're not going to get to spend as much time with some of the secondary characters as we will with this series that's going to explore the history of this town. So I would say the advice that I might have to give to a writer is figure out what the shape of the book is and how many pages, how many words do you have? You're obviously not going to be able to do something like, War and Peace or some Tolstoy epic if you've got 250 pages. So those characters, you might need to lean in some tropes or some archetypes that people know about already in order to give those characters just something for the reader to latch onto. Because if you don't do enough, these characters are almost floating in space. They're just sort of an amalgamation of whatever the reader projects on them. And for me, that ends up being part of myself, but another reader might take a completely different character and project themselves onto it as well. So definitely try to figure out what the shape of the book is that you're trying to write, and then, work with the characters within those parameters.
So very little pantsing involved in the process.
I'm a complete pantser. So
Yeah.
honestly, my advice is probably going to contradict itself. I usually have some sort of an outline and an ending, and then that outline gets thrown out about a third of the way through. It's like a road trip. My wife and I and our dog took a road trip recently, and we had a whole plan for the 14 days. And the second day of the road trip, I got this wild hair, and we're like, we're going to Crater Lake, Oregon. I know it's like completely out of the way. That threw everything off. My writing process is exactly the same. I go in with a plan, and then something shiny totally attracts my attention, and I just take a left or a right, and I follow that. It seems to work out sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. When it doesn't, but
yeah, when it doesn't, we suddenly realize 300 pages in that we've written, something else that's not really going to work, and we've got to go back to scratch.
no, that's awesome. Did you do any research to get into the head of the 13-year-old girl,
Oh
because
yeah.
pretty spot on.
Yeah, so I've got nephews and nieces. I've got friends who have children that age. My wife and I don't have any kids. We have a dog. That's our existence, really. So you would think that this is going to be a stretch. But, I'm surrounded by children, whether I want to or not. I'm a former teacher myself. And in the early days of teaching, I taught middle school kids. And I can remember what it was like to be an awkward middle schooler as well, when you're kind of pulled between these two different directions. You've still got the brain of a kid, but now, your hormones have come online. Suddenly, people are looking at you differently. The world feels differently. Your parents, who were really cool, last year, suddenly are just annoying, and you want this space for yourself. So yeah, there was a lot of kind of just looking back on my teenage years that went into trying to bring Zelda to life, as well as, looking at my neighbors or my friends and talking to them and talking to their kids as well. I mean, that's one of the things that I try to do as much as possible, is just ask them questions. What's your day like? Walk me through it. And then a lot of the times they will initially kind of hesitate, because there's this, why do you want to know why adults don't ask me those questions? And then I'll say, look, like, I'm writing a book about a 13-year-old girl who goes through some pretty heavy tragedies. And how would you handle this? And they will be surprisingly candid. They will love to be included in things like that. So it's actually, ironically, writing this character has brought me closer to some of my friends' kids than probably they had intended, or I had intended, but it's been wonderful.
Yeah, that time of life is a horror story in itself sometimes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're saying that there's no horror that's happening. I'm like, there's a 13-year-old girl, every page is horror.
Just being that age. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So let's dig into process a little more, maybe more of the technical stuff. So people that might be interested in self-publishing, kind of that side of things. I'm self-publishing, so I try to, include a lot of advice on this channel about that whole process, a lot that I'm even learning as I go along, but it sounds like you
Yeah.
have been doing it for a long time, so probably have some good insights. So do you, and I think what people are always really curious about is what a schedule looks like for something like that. So do you do this full time? What is your schedule kind of like when it comes to making sure you're meeting deadlines without someone breathing down your neck for deadlines and all of that?
So I'm very fortunate in that I do this full time. I've been able to do this full time for about the last 2 years. When the pandemic came along, I was a professor at college, or an adjunct. I was teaching English. had just finished getting my MFA in creative writing. And my plan was essentially to kind of do two things: to teach, which is what I had been doing for, a decade and a half, and to write on the side. My wife, basically, as she has done in the past, pushed me out of the airplane and told me to sew my parachute on the way down. It was absolutely a terrifying decision, but in hindsight, it was great, because in 1 year I wrote 3 books, and another year 2 books. So suddenly I had the schedule freed up, where I was able to do this full time. And it has been self-sustaining ever since. Like any sort of business, I've had to learn a ton of this on the fly, and it absolutely is a business. There's 50% of this job that is not involved with the writing, that's involved with marketing, or learning how to run ads, or having to do other stuff. So my day can look drastically different depending upon what my objectives are during that day. I always try to get my writing done as soon as possible in the day. I always try to get in about 2,500 to 3,000 words every day. I usually write first drafts by longhand, and then I edit them by hand and go back and put it in. And that is very enjoyable to me, because I don't get distracted by Facebook. I don't get distracted going down Wikipedia rabbit holes. I don't get distracted by all the sort of things that are on the internet, that when you're writing and you decide to open a second window and learn about what, the lost coast of California looked like in the 1820s, suddenly you're figuring out what beaver pelts and how animals were skinned back in that day, and you're 2 hours behind your word count. So the longhand for me is almost a self-preservation method to keep me on track. And it's something that I've had do during graduate school. It's something that I had to do in previous jobs as well, because I'm highly distractible. I'm curious. I want to know about all the things, and all the things aren't important for the task, which is writing the book.
Yeah, that's really impressive in itself, though, the writing the entire thing by line.
Yeah, I've got these stacks of these books, and I'm particular with the pens and the inks that I use, and the actual type of paper and everything. It's so silly, but I've got a shelf below this desk that you can't see that's just filled with these notebooks. And I can go back and say, oh, here's the first draft of Head Like a Hole, when I didn't even have a title for it. It was just Untitled 90s Project. So yeah, it's fun. And maybe someday I'm going to, auction them off or make them into little bookmarks and swag for like patrons or something like that. But for now, it's just a fun thing to look at and remind myself of how far it came.
They'll be worth a fortune someday.
They'll be worth maybe a couple bucks, but we'll see.
We'll see. So talk a little bit about the publishing process itself, then maybe some things that maybe surprised you about, or how things have changed kind of that as you've been doing this since you started, that viewers, might want to know about, or need to know about just in the last, or maybe some challenges you've come across.
Yeah, so I think I touched a little bit about the business side of it, but that's one of those things that I think is an uncomfortable reality for so many. A lot of indie authors, self-publishers just say, well, I just want to get a deal, so someone is going to do these other things for me. I just want to focus on the writing. And if you go with a big traditional publisher and they give you a really nice advance and they have a marketing team and they're going to throw all the muscle and resources behind you, that might happen. It's happening a lot less, but it might happen, and if your book doesn't earn out, it will probably not ever happen again to you. But if you kind of win the lottery in that sense, it could happen. As an indie, the publishing process is, there's two halves of it. There's the creative side, which is the producing of the content, which is everyone's favorite. I mean, I love it too, as much as I hate it right now. I'm in the middle of a book and I'm struggling to figure out where a comma goes for an hour. But the business side is the side that you have to put on your business hat. You have to really approach it differently. And that takes a lot to learn, because you can feel like you've just finished a book. You can feel like you've just mastered this one side. Why do you have to learn this entirely other skill set that you're going to feel incredibly deficient in? I mean, when I learn a new thing, the first thing I want to do is not do that, because it's just frustration. But you have to push through that. And I've had to train myself that, like, when I do get frustrated with that, that just means that I'm learning a new thing. I'm building a new muscle. I'm building new skills. So I think that if you're publishing, if you're an indie publisher, if you're an indie writer, and you're thinking of self-publishing, have a long, hard chat with yourself what route you want to go. Do you want to partner up with another small press who might be able to do all that for you? That would be great. You're going to be leaving a lot of money on the table if you do that, but they will handle that for you. They'll do Facebook ads, Amazon ads. They might arrange book signings. They might send you a carton of boxes and say books and say, send these out to some people. And they can take care of that. But again, you'll be leaving a lot of money on the table if you do that. That Amazon check, that's 70%, might go down to 35 or 45%. And so you would then have to sell more books in order to kind of make what you would make otherwise. If you are interested in doing all that yourself, you need to find mentorship, and you need to find some sort of system or structure to teach it to you, because all of that information is out there. It's just not taught openly in a sort of structured coursework. There's no degree that you can get right now in indie publishing. There should be. And I think that a lot of the schools are doing authors a huge disservice by not focusing on that. I mean, I got my MFA. I spent 3 years in graduate school, and we never once talked about the business side of indie publishing. I can tell you about, Gothic literature. I can tell you about poetry and all this stuff. I'm apparently qualified to teach at the college level, but I could not at the time, based upon the stuff that I had learned in that program, explain how running your own publishing company even remotely worked. And I think that's a kind of failure of our educational system. But if you're an indie, you need to do that yourself. You need to get that information yourself. You need to be proactive and go out there. And that can be overwhelming for some people. For me, it's totally my jam once it gets going, but it takes a while to get that momentum.
Well, if you ever decide to teach it or create courses on how to do it, I will be there to soak up the information.
I think the big misconception too that we have is that like one person has all the answers. Like I've taken Mark Dawson's courses, I've gone to like 20 books and these conferences, and you'll find someone that has all this information, and you can try to repeat that and your results might be different because what they did 2 or 3 years ago worked 2 or 3 years ago, but now maybe that market space got really crowded, or now maybe the readership has changed. So I think being an indie, more than anything else, is about constantly being hungry to learn, constantly being able to change and to adapt and to be adaptable and to enjoy that process of being adaptable. For me, it's fun. It's scary, but it's fun.
And it sounds like it might include a lot of discipline, which I think is at odds a lot of the time with our especially for readers, with our creative pursuits. We want to be pantsers. We want to just write when the moment takes us. So how do you kind of find that balance between discipline and letting your creativity do what it's going to do? I think a lot of writers hear discipline and they're like, nope, not for me, but
I would say that I haven't found it. So that's the honest answer. I try to find it. It's sort of like when you go to the gym, some days are better than others. When you set exercising as a goal that you do every day, you have some days where you beat some records, and you have some days where you just have to jump on the elliptical and you can barely do anything else. I would say that the discipline part is, it's something that you just have to have, and if you don't have it, you have to build a system. Like I am highly distractible, so I write by longhand. My brain wants to chase dopamine and spend its time on social media or Reddit or playing video games or doing these other things. So I have a system in place where I can't hop onto these websites during certain times of day. I use apps that block my access. I was talking to another author who basically pays someone to take the Wi-Fi chip out of his laptop. And I was like, that sounds great. Can you give me their number? Because they're like, yeah, I have to do it like back in the day. It's a USB dongle that plugs into a cord. My computer otherwise has no Wi-Fi, no internet access. And I'm like, why do we have to like pay a specialist to do that? I want to buy that directly from Apple. So these are the systems that I've had to set up for myself. Other people who are probably way more disciplined than me are hearing this and probably rolling their eyes. But, you're each on our own journey. And I think you have to figure out, what are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And whatever those weaknesses are, while you're writing a book, while you're selling your book, while you're running the indie business, those weaknesses are going to pop up there constantly. Do you tune out after 30 minutes of writing? Try writing sprints. Write for 20 minutes, stop, take a break, walk the dog, play with the kid, do something like that. So constantly looking for ways that you can optimize yourself. I don't think I'm ever going to achieve like optimization where I'm just like, this is it, I'm done. I have achieved perfection. I've like ascended to the level of perfection. But I think that it's a journey to aspire to, and it's something I'm trying towards.
right. And it probably changes based on your life at the moment, right? I think that
Totally. Yeah.
Something that you mentioned, adaptability, something that I think writers, especially trying to make a career of it, need to understand. Like you can't just all of a sudden I'm going to find this ideal routine and that's the thing that's going to like stick, because you could find that ideal routine and the next day, your family schedule changes or something. So I think
100%. My wife broke her finger a couple days ago because the dog pulled the leash and it was wrapped around her finger and just twisted and shattered it. And so my whole week has now been driving her to the hospital because her hand is all goofed up. So she can't really grip the wheel to make a left turn. So if we were just doing right turns, she could do that. But that's a little challenging to get to the hospital with. And then she has surgery tomorrow. Today she had blood work. They took 4 vials from her. So she was just like, I don't know if I should drive home with 4 vials missing. So that this week, if I were to judge it based upon my output compared to the standard week, would probably be less. But I bring my laptop to the hospital. I try to adapt. I try to go into overtime tonight. So, I'll be playing a little less video games tonight and doing a little more writing. Those are the things that, as a writer, people look at you and they're just like, well, you're just, you're doing something, so I can bother you. You're not actually at work. You're just thinking about it. And for me, that time that I spend thinking and kind of gearing up to write is so incredibly important that I'm protective of it. I literally created this little office in a closet so I can just wall myself off from the world for a few hours, because otherwise it's very easy for me to get distracted. It's easy for people to distract me. It's easy for that airplane that I need to get down the runway and get enough speed to kind of get it off the runway and actually start producing quality work. It takes a while for that to happen. And I need to protect my process and be protective of that time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that for sure. So I'm sure even with all of that, you probably hit blocks sometimes, writer's block.
Oh, yeah.
And here on Creative Warrior channel, I talk a lot about the Creative Warrior path. That are the tools that helped me kind of find my way out of writer's block many moons ago, and still, help me when I get stuck, because I still do. We all do. So the path is prompts, actions, your tribe, your community, and holistic health, taking care of yourself, doing yoga, making sure you're being active. So for me, those are the tools that will help get me out of a block. Not always guaranteed, but will help get me in that direction, right? Do you have any? We've talked a little bit about writing by hand and, your office. Do you have any tools maybe that we haven't touched on that you use when you're stuck, or do you even get stuck in writer's block?
I feel that my first draft is always some form of a panic attack and writer's block. It's this weird kind of quasi thing where I'm outrunning the doubt, like Indiana Jones outrunning that ball that's running after him. And if I just can get enough words down to get to the end, I know that I can revise it into some great shape. And for me, the real magic happens during revision. So the writer's block doesn't for me happen during second draft, third draft, fourth draft, fifth draft. It happens usually during the first draft. And it's usually when I've had a few days where I haven't gotten enough words down to kind of outrun that doubt, outright the doubt. And I think for me, really going back and kind of just taking a red pen to that chapter that I was stuck at, going over it, editing it there, kind of switches something in my brain. My brain moves from creative mode to editing mode. And editing mode for me, I know I'm fixing something, but creationary mode it's abstract, it's messy. I've got the paints on my hand and the canvas is at a weird angle and the room is all spattered with paint. So I usually have to kind of switch my brain and then trick it. And then once I'm feeling good, once the dopamine is flowing, once I'm kind of falling back in love with the shape of the story, then I can jump into the blank pages. And I usually find for me that that's where I start getting that momentum again. Like you said, exercise is absolutely important. Walking my dog. I walk my dog daily. And during that time, I just put on music with no lyrics. Usually it's some sort of video game soundtrack, classical music, ambient, whatever it is. And just sort of think, it's easy. My dog's smelling the bushes and plays with other dogs and things like that. So I give myself 45 minutes or an hour to really just kind of let my brain wander. And by the end of that, or a bike ride, I can't wait to get back to the blank page. I'm really excited at that point. So
the movie soundtracks here scores?
Yeah, movie soundtracks are great. Video game soundtracks, a lot of that stuff is supposed to inspire emotion. It's going to make you feel something, but not get in the way.
Yeah.
Video game soundtracks are great because they're trying to lull you into sort of like a trance during the game. And I find that writing is very similar. You know, I am almost in a sort of trance when I'm creating something. And yeah, movie soundtracks, you know, that gets my heart going, especially if it's anything that, like, you know, Hans Zimmer has done, like any Christopher Nolan soundtrack. I will put that on during like the last third of a book and just have these epic scenes.
Yes, yes. No, I want to like unpack everything you just said there, but I think it's really interesting that the first draft is kind of where you get stuck, and it shows how different everyone's processes and everyone's ways of thinking are, because that is where I love just throwing everything at the paper, just going and going and getting that done. And it's the editing where I'm like, now what? Like, how do I fix this? How do I fix this? Like, I just want to go back and go back to the writing part where I'm just easily throwing things at paper. But I think what you've said can apply to everyone, no matter what part you hate or love. Let yourself go back to the part you love for a few minutes to get that part of your brain, give yourself a little more confidence, go back to the part that's easier for you and that you enjoy doing. And so you can get that vibe going again, and then go back to the part that's harder. I think that's a really important note. From what, is that a good way to kind of describe it, you think?
That's a great way to describe it. I'm always really envious of writers when they're say what you just said, that the first draft is their favorite part. Because for me, that's not. That's like the part where it's just so ambiguous. Like it's just this, you know, starry sky, and I'm trying to get towards one planet, and I've got to figure out, you know, the trip there and do all these other things that I don't know how to do. For me, that first draft is almost like I don't know if I can do it, but once you get to the end, it's like, okay, I did it. Now it's just reshaping it. Now it's just figuring out what I want to emphasize. Maybe there is a character that I created halfway through the book to solve a problem. I need to go back and introduce him way earlier in the story, because it's going to seem kind of arbitrary if I bring him in halfway through the novel. I'm always envious of writers who say that the first draft, that phase is their favorite, because it's just hell on earth for me. But good on you.
It's my favorite, but it doesn't mean that it, you know, once it's done, it's hard sometimes to go back and fix it. It's your favorite, so it's your baby, and you're like, but this was beautiful. I loved
you. Oh, I'm definitely there with that. Yeah, that's why you. Yeah, I need space between drafts generally, usually a few weeks. And that's hard because my instinct is to immediately circle back and start writing again. Oh, interesting. You're talking to a horror writer and something spooky happened.
Something just shattered and I have no idea what it was.
Oh, interesting.
Oh my gosh, my oven door just completely. I'm gonna have to edit all this out.
Yeah, keep it in. Spooky vibes. Or edit it out. Yep.
Well, maybe I'll keep it in.
Would you want to check and see that there's not someone there with a hockey mask wandering around?
Everything's
there
off.
You go.
So I have no idea what just happened.
You do have a seed for a horror story right there. You say that you can't write it, but you can use this prompt and just at least do a little short story.
There we go. No, I do actually enjoy writing horror, and a lot of my stories do kind of have a dark horror kind of undertone to them, but like I enjoy like subtle horror. Like it's more the monsters and like I'm just in awe of like the imagery you create, and like
it was a little intense and had like a hole. That was definitely towards the other end of the spectrum. I mean, when you're going into like body horror and stuff like that, I think the readership generally wants to know what like the mutations and those little things are like. So I definitely dialed it up to 10. I'd say that By the Light of Dead Stars and Forsaken and my other stuff is a little more subtle than it.
Yeah, I do have Forsaken downloaded at the moment, so that is on my list. So we'll start to wrap up things because clearly
Sure.
there's something happening in my house.
Clearly you have a poltergeist.
Maybe it's a sign to wrap things up, but I'll give you a choice here kind of for this last bit because I'm sure writers always get asked, what advice would you have? So that I'll make that one choice, what advice would you have for writers trying to get published, or publishing on their own because it can be really hard, really challenging. Or what is the best piece of writing advice you've ever received that made a really big difference in kind of how you work, essentially, or write or publish? You can answer both, or you can answer one, whichever one.
Yeah, I would say that the longer I've been in this, the more that I've gravitated towards it's a marathon, not a sprint mentality. I think in my 20s, if you'd gone back to the version of Andrew that was trying to make every single thing perfect on the first draft, that was absolutely, this needs to be perfect. Everything needs to be perfect. I think that I would tell him to just kind of chill out. And you're looking at a career. A career has a trajectory, it has a journey, it has arcs. And, not every book is going to be a complete winner. You obviously want to put your best product forward every single time. Of course, I'm not saying that. But I think some writers really spend a lot of time trying to get the absolute most perfect, most original, most unique story out there, that it paralyzes them. I mean, I know plenty of writers who are still writing their first book 10 to 15 years later. And I would just wonder, how perfect can that book be? Or if they haven't just rewritten it and they're moving commas around at this point. So really take the long-term viewpoint and ask yourself, do you want to do this for a career, or is this just something you want to do on the side? And there's totally nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. A lot of my most respected writers, this is their second job, or they have two jobs. Paul Tremblay teaches math. A lot of horror writers are professors. I think F. Paul Wilson was a dentist for most of his life, in addition to writing, 40 something novels. And there's nothing wrong with that. Horror is a hard genre to scratch out a living to begin with. So have that conversation with yourself early on in the process, and then figure out how you can make it through this as a marathon, week by week, month by month, year by year. Set a goal. Was your goal last year to write one book? Maybe try writing a book and 2 short stories. Maybe try writing 2 books. Just increase it a little bit each year. And then at some point, you'll look back and you'll be like, I have 6 books, I have 12 books, I have 20 books. That's the sort of marathon perspective, because the sprint perspective seems to lead to a lot of burnout. And it does in me, especially when I take this needs to be the most perfect thing ever. I need to get this absolutely 100% perfect. I can be my own worst enemy in that case.
Yeah. And I feel like that's important when it comes to comparison too, the sprint.
Oh, yeah.
There are a lot of writers out there who crank out a ton of books, in a year or whatever that is. But if that's not you, and that's not doesn't work with your lifestyle, you don't know what their lifestyle it is. It could be
absolutely.
So trying to compare yourself could definitely lead to that burnout. I know I do that. I'm like, oh, this person's done this many books in this many years. Like, I need to up my game, but I also work full time and have all these other things. And, you just don't know their schedule.
Absolutely. You meet these authors at these conferences, and I go to, 2 or 3 conferences a year, and someone will be like, well, I wrote 20 books last year. And it blows my mind how you wrote 20 books. First of all, is it a book, or is it like a novella? Is it 25,000 words? Like, what are we defining as a book? Because every genre is a little different. If they tell me they wrote 20 high fantasy books at 200,000 words each, I'm kind of like, are you even sleeping? What are you doing? How are you doing that? Are you independently wealthy to the point that you just have people taking care of everything else for you? What sort of system have you built, and how can I do that too? Because that sounds incredible. But that's also not me. That would probably bring no joy to the process for me. And so, yeah, you have to figure out what you want to do and how it can fit into your life and your lifestyle and everything. Having kids can be a massive attention thing. My wife and I got a new dog, about 6 months ago. I forgot how hellish and wonderful and hellish having a puppy is. But yeah, it's been a complete distraction. And my productivity is cratered this year because of that. So yeah, don't compare yourself to other writers. Compare yourself to the writer you were a year ago. And that's what I've found has definitely helped me feel better about myself. A year ago, did it take me 5 drafts to close out a novel? Maybe 4 drafts now. A couple years from now, will I be able to get it in 3 drafts? That would be a comparison to my own self and my own journey that I would feel a lot better about making than rather some writer at a conference who's written 30 romance books in 30 days or something like that.
Well, that would be a feat.
That would be a feat, but I wouldn't be surprised too with some of the indie authors.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. But also, and I like what you said about not taking the joy out of it either. You also need to do it at a pace where you still love it.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yep.
So yeah, I think that is a great place to end. Thank you so much for being here. One more before we sign off. Where can people find you online? Where can they get your books? Where can they find more about you?
So everything can be found at my website, andrewvanwey.com, ANDREWVANWEY.com. It's a Dutch name. I don't know why they spelled it like that. Way, actually, I think Van means from, and Way is just the city. So Andrew from Way is probably where it was originally. So I guess I do know that. But that's where you can find me, andrewvanwey.com. And all my social links are on the site. I spend way too much time on Facebook, and I'm probably going to be start doing TikTok at some point, and probably have to jettison Instagram or something like that, because I just don't have enough room in my life for all the different channels to waste time on.
I feel that. We will definitely put all those links in the description below as well. So thank you again, Andrew, for joining us. Can't wait to finish the book and can't wait to see more from you.
Thank you very much for having me. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you so much for giving our readers some tips and tools that they can use to fight for their creativity.